Welcome aboard to the Captain Crypto Show. Today, join the Pirates Parley, where the captain sits down with the industry's movers and shakers as they share stories from their journey and discuss their upcoming adventures. Here's your host, Kylan Hurt.
Arr! Welcome back to the Captain Crypto Show. Today, we're taking a trip to a land filled with magic and wizardry. A place where they say that the transactions that you make with your treasure can be made invisible. Oh, yes, that's right. Today, we're setting course for a project known simply as GRIN.
Today, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming to the Pirates Parley Mr. Michael Cordner of the GRIN project, who's also known as YeastPlume. And today we're going to be talking about the GRIN project, hopefully going into quite a bit of detail, because it's one of the projects that I've been discussing quite a bit on my podcast, and I believe that a lot of the listeners out there might enjoy learning about it. So, Michael, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
All right, welcome aboard, Michael.
All right, thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. So where should we start off? I think it probably makes the most sense to start off with a little bit of background about you. From what I could tell on your biography on the GRIN project website, seems like you've been doing coding for about 20 years or so. So maybe go ahead and take some time to kind of walk us through how you first got into coding to begin with, and then eventually how that path would lead to cryptocurrency and the GRIN project.
Oh, that's going to be a very winding path, I'm afraid. So I'm
not fine with us.
Detail. But okay, so yeah, as you said, I've been coding or developing in some form for about 20 years now. In the early days, I was like a lot of young programmers. I was enamored by the games industry. I did a little bit of work there. From there, I kind of moved on to some more corporate environments, like point of sale stuff.
Right. How long? What time period are we talking here, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, we're talking 1997 to 2000, roughly.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, back in the days when Java was up and coming, and everyone was excited about that. From there, that was actually in Canada, and then for some reason I decided to up and move to Ireland in the middle of all of that. And then since I've been here, I've worked on quite a few things. I spent quite a bit of time in the educational sector doing educational software and what have you, and previous to kind of the current phase of my career, I actually formed a company to do some educational software.
Right.
We created a product called Shakespeare in Bits. Which
yeah, I saw that. I actually took a little bit of a look at it. It looks like it was kind of, I don't know if it's Flash Player, but it's kind of animations to go along with some of the Shakespeare bits.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just kind of this was kind of in the days when the iPad was just coming out and everyone was excited about it, and we thought, hey, there's something that could work very well, as a technology demonstration for Apple. And it turns out that they were actually quite good to us in that regard, because they ended up featuring it quite a bit and had a relationship with them. So I was able to build kind of I'm not say hugely successful, but I mean, a decent business out of that. And that's kind of on a background thread at the moment. Since then, and this is kind of where it's getting a little bit more relevant to what we're doing now, I've been working at kind of on a contract basis in a large French company doing a lot of identity management, so smart cards and other kind of identity products. And through that, I've learned quite a lot about implementing cryptographic algorithms and what have you, which obviously with respect to Bitcoin and blockchain technologies, I've been watching it for a while, like a lot of people, and learning about it kind of, as I say, on a background thread for quite some time. But it's only really like in recent times where I decided I want to do this as a career. And for me, the best way to really learn about it properly and be able to do it and contribute to the field is to just jump in and start working on something. And so that brings us to the GRIN project, which I'd considered a few other projects around the time.
Right.
When I came across.
Do you mind me asking which other projects you were considering?
I was looking at Digibyte for a while. Because there was a few innovations in there. They seemed to bring a few things to the table. There were a couple of others, but in looking at them, it kind of became evident to me. I was kind of learning as I went along as well, so I didn't, have all the background about all the coins that are out there. but it seemed to me that a lot of them weren't really bringing a lot more to the table, other than kind of cloning Bitcoin and adding their own little bits and pieces here and there.
Right.
But when I came across GRIN, it was after kind of looking into it for a while, it was very clear that there was something different was going on here.
Right. How would you characterize? Sorry, go ahead.
As in something new. They were like a MimbleWimble blockchain. I think it brings something new to the table that hasn't been seen before. And that's kind of why I decided to start, hanging around the forums a bit, or the chat channel a bit, and then eventually starting to contribute there.
Right.
And then since then, we'll get into that, I'm sure.
Yeah, we will. So I am kind of curious. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay. I am kind of curious then. So when, at what point did you start finding out about cryptocurrency? Was it something where you were pretty early because you were already working in security and cryptography? Or?
Yeah, I was following Bitcoin back from the fairly early days. I think around 2010.
Okay.
When it first appeared in an article on Slashdot, and I happened to look into it a little bit. Like a lot of other people, obviously I didn't invest early enough. But
no one ever. There's very few people that say that they invested enough early on. It's very rare that you meet someone that says that.
Yeah, exactly. But the technology itself is interesting enough to keep the interest up, obviously. And it really, over the past few years, kind of working on the crypto stuff, my interest has kind of started to merge with the career a little bit now, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, so I guess we'll get to that in a moment. Just out of curiosity, as we start to talk about the project, a lot of the developers on the project seem to have Harry Potter-related usernames and stuff like that. So I was kind of curious, where does the username YeastPlume come from?
It comes from absolutely nothing to do with anything to do with Harry Potter, I'm afraid. It's an in-joke between myself and Mrs. YeastPlume, so I actually can't get into detail there because I assume this is a family show. But,
I don't know if this is a family show, but you don't have to go into it either way.
No, I'm not going to go into detail there. We'll get into the history of why there are so many Harry Potter references in this project as well. Yeah,
we will. So I guess one thing to start off with as we start talking about the project, it is fairly early on. It sounds like you guys are only on testnet. So if someone wanted to mine real units of GRIN, which are they called GRINs? How have they?
They're called GRINs at the moment.
Okay, got it. And
it's probably going to stick, because nobody's come up with anything better at this point.
Well, I was curious. The name GRIN, where does that come from? Because I don't know if it's an abbreviation or.
It is. It comes from Gringotts, the Goblin Bank in Harry Potter.
Ah, okay. Yes, as you can tell, I'm not exactly a Harry Potter. I'm not saying I'm against Harry Potter, but I just think it was probably a little bit after my time, if that makes sense.
No, I'm exactly the same way. Like I have actually read through them at one point, but it wouldn't have been part of my formative years or anything. So,
right. So let's start off with a little bit of a broad summary or overview of what GRIN is and maybe what the sort of mission or objectives are for the project.
Right. Okay. Well, in terms of a broad overview, there are really two things that we're talking about here that I think we have to treat separately. So the first is the MimbleWimble protocol, for lack of a better word, blockchain format. And then the second is the GRIN project itself, which is a blockchain and an implementation that implements the MimbleWimble blockchain format.
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
It's probably hard to talk about GRIN without going into MimbleWimble itself first, because obviously GRIN is kind of a layer on top of that with a lot of other decisions and things that need to be considered.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead. Let's hear this.
Yeah.
I've already done a little bit of research, but obviously you'll know MimbleWimble quite a bit better than I will.
Yeah. Okay. Well, MimbleWimble is basically a blockchain format, and what it does is provide very, very good privacy right out of the box, and in a way that's kind of intrinsic to the format. So the way it does this is through it's basically two main aspects to it. Now, how technical would you like me to get here at this point, or should I just try and keep it?
I would say let's make it medium technical. Every so often, if you feel yourself getting too technical, maybe take one step back and try to simplify it, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll start. As I've just said, there's kind of two main pillars to MimbleWimble. The first is something called confidential transactions. And that is a way of putting together a transaction in a manner that completely hides the amounts that have gone into it. So, for instance, if I'm sending you, say I'm setting up a recurring payment for my rent or something, and it's the exact same amount every month, even though it's the exact same amount every month, it's going to be concealed in such a way that you have no idea what it is if you're a verifier or a validator actually looking at the block.
Right, and what is the underlying, because I know there are a lot of terms here. Sometimes there are implementations versus theories. So is this the same thing as range proofs, or does that come in at a later, at a different point?
Range proofs is actually a part of confidential transactions.
Okay,
so the way confidential transactions are constructed, it would break basically if you put a negative value in there as the amount. So all a range proof does is prove without actually revealing the amount that the amount is greater than 0.
Okay, got it.
Okay, and that's just not specific to MimbleWimble. That's confidential transactions, which you find in Monero as well, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the first point. So all of we basically produce a lot of outputs, and the transaction details are completely hidden from anybody, from validate any kind of prying eyes. The second point, and this is something where that really is unique to MimbleWimble, because this came from the original paper. You can take all of these confidential transactions and you can actually mathematically sum them. Instead of having to trace through absolutely every single input and output to validate them, as in Bitcoin, you can simply sum them together. So all you're trying to do is ensure that the outputs and the inputs in the transaction sum to 0. And once you have that, you can also use that to prove the ownership of the transaction. So again, maybe getting a tiny bit technical here.
Yeah, go for it.
But in Bitcoin, whereas Bitcoin is basically a big long ledger of the history of every single coin and every single output and input that's happened since the Genesis block, basically. In the case of MimbleWimble, all you need to do is sum all of the transactions together, figure out whether they validate, which means the sum of them equals 0, and you've proved that no coins have been created, and that you've also proved ownership as well through the signature that's used to prove that no coins have been created and they sum to 0. So once that happens, and this is probably one of the major kind of new advantages out of MimbleWimble, is that if you have all these transactions that amount or that sum to 0, you can start cutting them out of the blockchain, and you have a notion that we call cut through.
Got it. So that'll help with scaling, yeah. Right? It helps to...
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give kind of a real world example here, say I send you a few GRINs, and then you send them on to someone else, say you send them to your mother.
Right.
What appears on the blockchain is we can actually cut out all of that middle transaction, and there's no record whatsoever that you ever had them.
I've been cut out, which is good. I mean, if I'm looking for privacy, that's exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's what you're looking for. So that's basically those kind of the two pillars of MimbleWimble. It's the confidential transactions, as in transaction details are hidden, and the ability to cut through transactions, which means you have a lot more options when it comes to scaling and reducing the amount of data that has to be stored by all validators.
Right. So my understanding of this, I did a little bit of reading. It seems like the cut through parts, it works. Obviously, that's I would assume that's considered elliptical curve or elliptic curve cryptography. But my understanding is that it works somewhat similar to the way that HD wallets work, where it's something where I think if you take the private keys and you multiply it by a factor, I think
that's exactly right.
Public,
so the
public
39, I think it works on the same principle.
Correct.
As in you have one master key and you just multiply again, you get another key, you multiply again. But because of something called the discrete logarithm problem, there's no way to divide it back to get the original. And that's basically the essence of a public-private key pair in elliptic curve cryptography.
Okay, so let's go ahead, and that's a really good breakdown of the technological, I guess, fundamentals or foundation of MimbleWimble and GRIN. So from what I understand, confidential transaction, if we get into a little bit of the history of the origin of the GRIN project, I believe confidential transactions was, I don't know if invented is the right term, but is really pushed by Adam Back of Blockstream.
Yeah, that's right.
He's one of the core...
I think it was Gregory Maxwell was Maxwell, Adam Back were the originators of the confidential transactions paper.
Got it. Yeah. So then, do you want to go ahead with the history? I feel like I know some of it.
I mean, as far as confidential transactions, they were the originators of that paper, which is basically hiding amounts, and they kind of had a sample transaction in that paper of how a transaction might be structured.
Right.
that's also where the notion of the range proof comes in, because when you're structuring these transactions, you need to ensure that they will amount to zero, and you can't fiddle it by putting in a negative amount, which would break everything.
Right. Okay, so let's go into the history of it. So you had, after they came out with confidential transactions, I know Andrew Polstra, I think maybe he was the one that wrote the MimbleWimble paper, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, definitely. If you listen to a podcast by him, he probably tells the story a lot better than I do. But it is essentially some anonymous person using the name Tom Elvis Jedusor, which is the French translation of Tom Riddle from the Harry Potter books, which is Voldemort's alter alias or whatever it is.
Right.
Dropped a paper somewhere. I think it was on the Bitcoin Wizards IRC channel.
Right.
And from there, Andrew took it. He verified the mathematics behind it. He made some corrections to it, and then from that, kind of started popularizing the MimbleWimble concept. So once kind of Andrew kind of put that paper out there, I think that paper now was put out in about June of 2016. Now around the end of 2016, someone else showed up on the Bitcoin Wizards channel by the name of Ignotus Peveril. And I have to be honest with you, I don't even know if I'm saying it right, because I don't think I've ever heard it pronounced.
Yeah.
Saying that he'd been working on an implementation of MimbleWimble called GRIN. And from what I could see from the IRC logs from then, he started talking with Andrew, and it kind of all went from there. Have
you ever speculated whether it is Andrew? Are you even allowed to talk about that?
No, it's certainly not Andrew, because I've seen them in the same room at the same time, or rather the same chat room at the same time.
Okay, got it.
But Ignotus Peveril himself, he wishes to remain anonymous, and obviously we can't speculate about anything there because that's his desire.
Yeah,
but what I can say about him is he very much knows his stuff when it comes to blockchains, and that's kind of evident from the interactions that anyone can have with him on the MimbleWimble or the GRIN channel.
Right. So it sounds like, from the research that I've done, it sounded like they were maybe looking at implementing MimbleWimble on the Bitcoin blockchain. I think there might have even been a pull request submitted for it, but it was for whatever reason they did not merge it in. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure that whether there was a PR or not. I know there was some talk earlier from Andrew about implementing it as a sidechain to Bitcoin. But the thing about Bitcoin is that it's extremely conservative. So something like that is unlikely to be put into use in Bitcoin anytime soon. And then fortunately, with creating a new coin entirely, you have a lot of flexibility there to experiment and to try different things. Because we have had the MimbleWimble protocol as a theoretical construct, but actually putting it into practice into a blockchain, there's a lot of extra work there. There's a lot of things you need to kind of work through and figure out.
Yeah, without a doubt. So I'm trying to think then, once the GRIN paper had come out, then I guess once I think at that point they probably figured they were not able to implement it on Bitcoin. So do you have any idea? I know you've come onto the project probably within the last half year or so, but do you know what that discussion was like when they were trying to figure out, okay, are we going to start our own coin here? And if so, kind of what are the parameters going to be? And I know some of the parameters are still being figured out, right? Because you guys haven't decided upon everything just yet. At least it doesn't seem like it just yet.
No, absolutely not. There's loads of other things that need to be decided still. As far as GRIN itself, I don't have all of the conversations beforehand, but from my perspective, it looks like the project was always intended to be its own coin.
Okay.
As in, it's written in a completely new language, not new language, but a different language to Bitcoin, which is Rust. The kind of original code that Ignotus has put out was very clearly, meant to be its own blockchain. So, whether there was some talk before that of implementing it as a sidechain of Bitcoin and making a decision there, it's kind of moot because this GRIN project is the first implementation of MimbleWimble.
So when you came on the project, it seemed like you became interested in it, and then it looks like there was a sort of fundraising drive to try to create enough funding to make it so you could work on it. What I assume is full time, right? This happened within the last half year or so.
Well, the funding drive was actually just in the past couple of months.
Okay, got it.
So I've been working on it since about, say, May or June of last year. And I started off, a few small PRs and a few testing things. And then from there, I took over kind of some integration of the mining code, which is basically a module that bridges some work from the Cuckoo Cycle proof of work code into and interfaces it into GRIN.
Yeah, it seems like that's the majority of and I don't know about the majority, but that was definitely an area that was emphasized in your bio on the project's website. So why don't we start talking about the proof of work algorithm, also maybe some of the distribution and the supply curve over time for the proposed GRIN coin?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Well, I guess we can start off with the Cuckoo Cycle proof of work. Now, that's the work of John Trump, who is...
Is that a real name?
No, that's his real name. It's a Dutch name. So,
you never know.
Yeah. And he's actually well known in the community from his work on an Equihash solver. I think that was used quite a while for doing Zcash proof of work. And anyway, Cuckoo Cycle is his own creation. And now it's quite technical to get into the details of how exactly the algorithm works. But what it basically does is solve a problem of finding cycles within a graph. And just to kind of illustrate what that means, say I throw a bunch of circles on the floor, or I draw a bunch of circles,
right,
and then I go and madly draw lines between all of them, right, at random. And so I have this thing where we have all these circles pointing at one another in a random way. These are nodes and edges, by the way, in the actual kind of mathematical speak.
Okay.
All that the Cuckoo Cycle algorithm does is figure out whether you can find a path or a cycle, to be a bit more precise, between these nodes. As in, if I start in one particular circle and then follow all of these random lines I drawn and follow them along a path, do I get back to the original node?
Yeah, and you're not allowed to retread one of the old...
No, you can't retread. It has to be one circle, and it has to be a certain length as well. And the parameter that John has chosen is 42.
The magic number.
Yeah, just a magic number.
Yeah, and from what I understand, I think the algorithm, the way it looks at it and it calculates that the hubs with the most, what would you call it, the most legs pointing to it, those hubs would be considered more valuable. Is that correct? Because there's more places you can go after you kind of visit that hub?
Quite possibly. The way the algorithm actually works is, and this is the reason it's called Cuckoo Cycles, it takes all these, it kind of takes these pairs of nodes, it puts them into something called a cuckoo graph, and it's called a cuckoo hash table. The reason it's called Cuckoo Cycle is because in nature, in a cuckoo nest, when a new baby is born and there's not enough room in the nest, the first one is then kicked out to make enough room, and that's just the way cuckoo birds work in nature, and it's kind of a nice analogy for the type of data structure that's used.
Okay, got it. So I guess since it's a proof of work algorithm, I mean, there's got to be a lot of decisions that you guys have to make when it comes to the actual proof of work algorithm. So I am kind of curious, what kind of parameters are you guys looking at? What are the trade-offs? I know centralization is a big one. It seems like with Cuckoo Cycle, you guys are trying to make it at least somewhat ASIC resistant, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the biggest benefit of Cuckoo Cycle is that it's very kind of memory bandwidth bound. It used to be memory latency bound, but now it's, thanks to GPU solving, it's more bandwidth bound. Again, we're probably getting a bit too technical here. But as you say, it's built very much to be ASIC resistant and to be kind of arms race resistant. As in, it's a goal of Cuckoo Cycle to be able to be mined on kind of commodity hardware and avoid the entire arms race that you get with other proof of work algorithms.
Right. So when I'm curious then, had they already decided that Cuckoo Cycle would be its proof of work algorithm before you came along, or?
Yeah, that was before I came along.
Okay. So once you came in, you probably had to start learning a bunch about it and obviously writing a lot of code related to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the code, the solver itself and the algorithms were already kind of implemented in C. And I took on the task of making them usable within GRIN and kind of building this plugin architecture where you could plug in, various implementations of the Cuckoo Cycle solver into it.
Yeah, and from what I understand, people are already doing some mining on the test net. So I am kind of curious, do you think someone with a CPU versus someone with a GPU, do you think the person with the CPU will, over time, will they still be able to, will they be somewhat competitive, or do you think it's mostly, you'll end up with a lot of people primarily mining with GPUs, with graphics cards?
Well, from what we know now, it's probably best way to look at this is to look at a CPU solve time as a multiple of the GPU solve time. So something like Equihash, it's like 20 to 1, as in a GPU can go through 20 hashes in the same time it would take a CPU to go through 1 hash. And I think that's, according to John, it's around 20 to 1 nowadays. With Cuckoo Cycle, from what we're seeing now, it's hopeful that we can get this within, under 10. So say we pick, 5 as a number, which is probably where we're going to be kind of on the initial releases of the initial solvers. So a GPU will be able to find, say, 5 times as many, or go through 5 times as many graphs in a second as a CPU.
Right.
And that's I think is a kind of if we can kind of keep that ratio within 5 to 1 or 10 to 1, then I'd say yes, a CPU could be competitive, as in it's not a total waste of time to be running one with all of the GPUs out there. Right,
and there are trade-offs, right? Because GPUs tend to cost quite a bit and use more energy as well.
Yeah, they cost a lot to use more energy. I can't say anything definite at this point, but it looks as if that solving on a GPU is actually kind of less energy intensive than some other algorithms, which is a good sign. Again, this is all kind of in development at the moment, so it's hard to get really good metrics about how fast a GPU is going to run versus a CPU.
Yeah, I am. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I can tell you that whereas we use graphs per second as opposed to hashes per second because it makes more sense for the algorithm. But in the initial release, I mean, we're talking about single-digit graphs per second, probably somewhere around 1 or 2 for the initial release of the solver. So if you have 12 graphics cards working away, you're only going to get maybe anywhere between 12 and 20 graphs per second.
Yeah, so this is actually an interesting question or an interesting topic because I was wondering how, because you guys are not live yet. I'll ask you a little bit later about the timeline. But if you're setting up a proof of work hashing algorithm, or an algorithm, I guess I should say, how do you decide what to set the difficulty level to when you first launch? Because you guys probably don't have the best idea of how many people are going to be ready to mine GRIN once you guys go live.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that's a difficult one, and I don't think any launch has ever gotten that right, especially because in our case, I mean, there's going to be no pre-mining of any description. We're basically going to have a time when the blockchain is going to be launched and everybody's going to be ready with their miners and their GPUs to have at it. We have a difficulty adjustment algorithm in place that will take effect at the moment it's set to 23 blocks in. And it's based on the DigiShield algorithm. So it basically looks at a window of the past 23 blocks and then finds the median and then adjusts the difficulty up or down accordingly. As to whether we're going to get it right from launch and kind of setting a minimum difficulty, we're not going to get it right because I don't think anybody's got it right. You'd expect to see a massive surge of activity at launch that may die down or it may not, or But one of the things actually, and we'll get into this later, is that our issuance rate might mitigate a little bit of the early gold rush mentality, and we can kind of get into that a little bit later on.
Yeah, I have read a little bit about that as well. We'll cover that in a moment. So I am kind of curious, just on a side note, when things go live, do you think you're going to have your little rig ready to go, or are you mostly just going to be an observer?
I have a rig here. It's called the Yeast Monster.
The Yeast Monster.
The Yeast Monster.
Terrorizing the blockchain.
No. I have a few kind of an assortment of cards in there we're using for development at the moment.
Yeah, I figure
I'm not going to go mad crazy at it. I'm a lot more interested in the technology and being a part of that than I am in trying to make any fast gains. But I'll be there mining as well.
I got it. I guess that, like you said, that's the best way to test it. And then when you're on the actual launch, when you're actually on the real blockchain, you'll still want to be testing it anyway. So you especially have a little extra incentive there.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and talk about that issuance rate, because it seems that from what I understand, and I don't know if these numbers are correct, but it sounded like it was going to be every block, maybe 60 grins were going to be issued, and that perhaps at least you guys were considering leaving that rate. So ultimately, the inflation rate would never quite get to zero, but as a percentage over time, the inflation rate would steadily decrease. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually glad that you framed that in terms of inflation rate, because while the number of coins being issued per block will stay the same, the inflation rate will decrease and approach that of Bitcoin. Over, I forgot the exact number of years, but it's within 10 years or so, you'll have an inflation rate that's approaching zero.
Right, and that's because there's already an increasing supply of grins in circulation. So, out of curiosity, what was the decision-making process behind keeping a steady absolute amount in issuance rate over time versus maybe one that eventually goes to zero?
Well, there's a few things. First off, I don't think anybody really has a definitive answer on what the best thing to do here is.
Right.
One of the things that does drive this is that, okay, number one, we'd like to see GRIN being used as a currency rather than a gold rush store of value.
Yeah, just sitting on it.
Yeah, as in everyone lining up to make a quick buck off of the launch. Secondly, the number of lost coins. I mean, Bitcoin's a great example of this. There's been 16.5 million or so coins issued. From the best estimates I've seen, 4 million of those are already lost. So you have a rate that's, you have an even greater deflation effect in Bitcoin going on. So by issuing a steady stream or a constant rate of issuance, we're hoping that we can mitigate a tiny bit the effect of lost coins.
Right, because even though most of these coins are divisible to maybe 10 decimal places, 8 decimal or 18 decimal places, something like that, over time, if you end up with less and less that are actually out there, I could see that becoming an issue over time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I am curious, I know you guys don't want people to use it just purely speculatively like they have with some of the other coins out there, but I guess the other side of it is that you guys also have to give enough incentive for the miners, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody has been able to prove that a fee market is enough to keep miner interest after kind of a coin's issuance schedule is finished. So this way, by continuing to offer the same reward, we're not guaranteeing, because nobody knows, this is a long time from now,
right,
but at least incentivizing miners to keep mining the coin even when the fee, whereas in other coins, once they've finished their issuance schedule, you're kind of relying on fees then.
Yeah,
nobody's proven that works.
Yeah, that's a big question with Bitcoin is once they get to that 21 million mark, it's like, okay, they assume that all the miners will just make their money off of fees, but I mean, there's a lot of factors in there. How many transactions? There's a lot of ifs
there, yeah.
Yeah, how many transactions per block? What are the fees at? Maybe the fees would have to be.
And let's don't forget the second and third layer solutions that will have come out by then, reducing fees. So.
Right. So I think that's quite a bit on mining that we've discussed so far. So one thing, if you don't mind me transitioning a little bit here, I see a couple things here. For starters, I have a little thing I wrote down that says half the transaction fees are burned. Is that correct or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that is correct.
Do you mind go ahead and explaining that?
No, it is correct. The notion of burning fees is rather than just rewarding the miner, you're rewarding everyone who's participating in the network by, you burnt so much, so you've kind of increased everyone else's value.
Right. So the circulating supply goes slightly down. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I have to say, though, for all of these things that are in the code right now, none of it is set in stone. And as a matter of fact, there's a hard fork schedule built right into the code at the moment. So every number of blocks that represents about 6 months, there's a forced or hard fork within the code. So any of these kind of things you might have gotten wrong or things you might like to change will be changed at those points.
So even after you guys go live, you will be allowed to do these hard forks, or I guess you'll have to do these hard forks every 6 months or so?
For the first 2 years. Yeah, not indefinitely, because obviously you don't want that much flux. but they're built in for the first 2 years. So any of the things that we've put in there that might turn out to not be working, we can fix easily within the first 2 years.
Yeah, do you think that makes it easier? I mean, I guess if the fork's scheduled, that's one thing. How do you decide what's going to get into the next hard fork, like within the code?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's going to be very dependent on the situation and our findings.
Yeah, and is
basically
it
from testnet and from launch? Yeah.
So since you guys are proof of work, is it something where the miners will really kind of decide in the end, or is it going to be a lot of the people writing the code, or just?
No, it's going to be the community in most cases. Realistically, it's the people writing the code who have kind of the best insight into how it's working.
Right.
But at the same time, you can get a bit kind of myopic doing that as well. So the community is going to have some feedback into that, obviously.
Okay, so one thing that I was reading when I was online, and this was actually fascinating, and it was a very novel idea to me, was the idea that GRIN might not or will not have addresses. Is that correct? That it's going to be using dynamically generated transactions, which is a completely new concept to me. So do you mind giving a little bit of a explain like I'm five explanation of these dynamic transactions?
Yeah, okay. There are no addresses in GRIN, and that's kind of a result of the mathematics in MimbleWimble. What there is basically is outputs and outputs and more outputs. So each transaction basically requires private keys to be generated by both parties. So sender and receiver both have to generate a set of private keys, and these keys need to be used in order to create the transaction. The result of the transaction is just more outputs. So at no point here is there an address. The downside of this is that you need to transactions need to be constructed interactively. So a wallet needs to talk to another wallet in order to create these transactions.
Yeah, and what will these communication channels be? I know I saw some people, I think it's I don't know if it's a developer for GRIN, but someone was saying that hypothetically you could use something like near field communication, and is it just kind of any sort of really digital communication channel?
Absolutely. At the moment, it's over HTTP, because that's kind of the most obvious thing to launch with. We're actually working on figuring out how to make that secure.
Right.
But yeah, it could absolutely work I've done some work in the smart card field. You could absolutely have, two cards talking to each other via NFC, or a device talking to each other. Anything that can do kind of an exchange, an electronic exchange, should be able to exchange a GRIN transaction.
Right. So I'm kind of curious then, when you think of using GRIN in the future, how do you kind of visualize yourself using it? I think a lot of people probably think like a mobile app, but maybe that would be too in person. So maybe some people would use kind of like a desktop or website, or how do you kind of imagine it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously in the initial phases or after initial release, it'll be mostly a case of people running their wallets on the internet in a secure way that anyone can access in order to send GRINs. Beyond that, I mean, there are a lot of possibilities here. You could look at it as a kind of akin to how a point of sale system works,
right?
As in you come along with your GRIN card, and then the other side is a wallet, or talking to a wallet receiver somewhere, and do the exchange that way with your own private keys kind of stored safely on your device. You can do it by, at some point bumping phones, or one of those kind of gimmicky things you can do with phones in order to get them to, that should work as well.
Yeah, and in the back of your mind, you have to think, okay, if this is a privacy-related coin, then how will you be communicating? Those channels will most likely have to be something secure, or it might be something where it's just you and your friend, and maybe that's one of those times when you use that little phone bump, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are things we're still working on. Our first priority is to get something that's reasonably secure working kind of over the open internet, which is by, adding TLS support into the wallet, and we have had talk of putting together kind of release Docker images that already come preloaded with the secure environment, so people don't need to worry about it. These are all things that we're exploring. Yeah,
Docker definitely comes in handy when you're trying to set up an environment. I think I have two main questions here related to the dynamic transactions. The first one is, how would the wallet kind of, does it not have an identity, or how does it know which transaction inputs belong to it. Does that make sense?
It does. It needs to keep track of it. So a wallet will, as we were talking about earlier, contains a master key from which all other keys are generated. And these keys are basically what it needs to have in order to identify its outputs in the UTXO set.
Okay, got it. Oh, and the other thing was I actually work for a software company, Edge, formerly Airbus, and we have mobile apps that are wallets. So I am kind of curious, is there a sort of conversation or discussion within the project where you guys are trying to figure out, because you guys will have your own client wallet, I'm sure, but then there's also the question of how, are you guys at least discussing how easy or hard you will make it for hardware wallets and mobile wallets that already exist to integrate your specific currency?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's something that we've discussed. I can't lie here. It is a much larger challenge to put GRIN onto a hardware wallet, for instance. Not because it's particularly difficult to do in itself, but because most other coins kind of work on the address system, and they kind of tend to work similarly.
Right.
Again, from my background in working on smart cards, all a mobile wallet is basically it's a smart card, like a credit card with a chip on it, and the chip itself is very good at storing private keys securely in a way that people can never get to them. And the chip is actually responsible for doing a lot of cryptographic manipulation to create that part of the transaction. So even though the technology itself is quite good at doing what a MimbleWimble exchange needs to do, it's just not something that's done or being done very often at the moment.
Yeah, and a lot of the development teams, kind of as you hinted at, if they integrate one currency, a lot of the times the next thing they'll do is try to find another big one that's similar to the first one that they integrated, that they're familiar with, or where the overhead of integrating the marginal resources needed for integrating the next currency will be as low as possible. So it's at least good that you guys are having that discussion, and I'm sure you guys will have a lot of challenges when it comes to actual wallet integration.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And the other thing that is a difficulty is the whole offline wallet or kind of cold wallet thing, because there's no way, say in Bitcoin, you put up an address and you can leave it there and people can send money into it till the end of time. But in this case, you really need something online in order to be able to do an exchange.
Right, got it. And like you said, with hardware wallets, they have those microcontrollers that prevent them from communicating, I guess, with the internet or with other devices. So I definitely see that'll be a challenge, but you guys are definitely aware of it.
Yep, absolutely.
For those of ye out there enjoying the show, your captain would love to get some feedback on how best to improve it. You can find me on Twitter as Captain Crypto HD, and on most of the high seas of social media as either Captain Crypto or Captain Crypto Show. Just be on the lookout for my logo. Also, be aware that due to the technical aspects of each platform, that my podcast feed will always have the most up-to-date and latest revisions of each episode. So, if you're enjoying this episode, feel free to give your old captain a review on iTunes and share this episode with the rest of your crew. Now, back to the show.
All right, Michael, when I start talking about the GRIN project, probably how would I say it? Since you guys are not live yet, the question I get asked the most is, okay, well, if it's on testnet right now, when will it be live? And I know this is probably a question you get all the time, and it's usually I find that people working for a project are very tight-lipped about this. So is there a proposed timeline for the GRIN project?
No, we don't have a definite timeline. What I can say just from my own experience is that it feels like it's about a year away.
Okay.
At least. Oh, sorry, shall I say at least a year away?
Right.
And some of the reason for that, I need to qualify as well. A lot of kind of coins out there are kind of clones of other coins or clones of Bitcoin in particular.
Right.
And a lot of the stuff has already been worked out. So if I'm creating a new coin and I just clone Bitcoin, I have all of the networking consensus. All of that stuff is all in place already, and it works. In this case, we're building a blockchain around the MimbleWimble format from scratch. and there's a lot of new code there, a lot of testing. Particularly, we've seen this kind of in testnet 1 around the networking, around how a network establishes consensus. All of this stuff has to be kind of worked through and thoroughly tested before, we could even think about releasing this into the wild.
Got it. Yeah, and I mean, when you're talking about working with people's money, it's definitely something you can't rush. So, okay, so that's the proposed timeline. That's fine. I mean, out of curiosity, are there kind of, for you personally, are there, how would I say it, dates or rough timelines where if it's ready by then, you'd be happy. If it's not ready by this certain point, then you would be a little disappointed, or?
No, not at this point, because I mean, it's very clear right now from the project, or if you follow it, that all of the developers and the community involved are serious about it.
Yeah.
It's going to be released. It's just a matter of when at this point.
Yeah, and the developers that you have on this project, they come with quite a bit of pedigree, it seems like. Some of them are coming from Blockstream or Bitcoin.
Absolutely. Andrew Poster, we talked about earlier, is a very well qualified Blockstream mathematician. Ignosis Peveril, we don't know who he is, but we know that he very much knows his stuff with respect to Bitcoin and how to put a blockchain together. We have another developer on there who's called himself Antioch Peveril, who in Harry Potter lore, again, I think is the brother right, of Ignosis Peveril. Again, I don't know who he is, but I can tell that he's a very, very qualified developer. As well as John Trump, who's on another plane when it comes to thinking through some of this stuff. So it's a good team. It's a well qualified team.
Yeah. So I'm curious. With 2017, everything was pretty crazy within cryptocurrency. Do you guys sometimes look at some of the successes and failures from within the last year or so during this cryptocurrency boom and kind of have a conversation of, okay, what do we want to take some of these ideas from these areas, or do we want to stay away? Kind of learn some lessons from some other failures of the ways that other currencies have done things. Because I did read an article at one point that said that maybe MimbleWimble would consider doing something token related or ICO related, and obviously it seems like you guys rejected that idea.
There was some particular parties put a presentation together that made it look as if they were going to do a MimbleWimble ICO. I don't know anything beyond that. And I should add, they're certainly welcome to. I mean, this is an open source project. This belongs to everybody. So we're not going to dictate what people can or can't do with the technology. But it's not coming from us.
Yeah, and it seems like you guys are kind of taking a technology-first approach, which is kind of rare these days. And I think that's one of the reasons why your project actually caught my eye, was that a lot of these other, I guess you could call them newer cryptocurrencies, have kind of like their technology or their schemes they have in place. They're very much hype related, and there's a little bit more of a focus. It's almost like there isn't really much of a mission. Their mission is just to maybe...
Their mission is to make as much money in a shorter time as possible, which in fairness is everyone's business plan. But no, and like you say, that's what caught my eye about this project as well, is that everybody involved in it, from all of the people involved in it, not a single one of them is in this just to try and make a quick buck. Everybody's very interested in the technology and wants to progress the field and wants to make a mark on it, and is really driven by the technological challenges. I don't know. I can't say it's unique in the space, but it's certainly very rare.
Yeah, it definitely is. I guess one thing. So, if you don't mind me asking, I think you hinted that maybe you don't know too much about Monero, but there are a lot of people who are interested in Monero who are, okay, obviously some of them want to make money. A lot of them, who doesn't want to make money? But a lot of them are fans of Monero, or they got into Monero because they are sort of privacy advocates. I was kind of curious if you are familiar with their project at all, or if you've kind of...
Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, I'm not an expert on it, but
right.
I mean, the more I've been kind of in the crypto space, the more I've started to look at other things. And Monero is certainly, I mean, I wouldn't call it competition to what we're doing. I'd kind of call it a sibling,
right,
at this point. The communities are very similar. There's a lot of crossover, a lot of people involved in both communities. the work that they do there directly relates to what we're doing, and the work that we're doing directly relates to them. I think that they're planning on implementing MimbleWimble as a sidechain within Monero.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Which I think I've heard, and I haven't looked into it too closely, but I think that's a great development. That certainly think that's exciting.
Yeah, with go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, with Monero, definitely, since they have this sort of dynamic block size, I think the fees, the amount of XMR per, I think, byte is something that, as I understand, is kind of set in stone. It's almost like a promise that they have given to the miners. So that creates, since the transactions are relatively large in size, that means that they can get pretty costly. And the dynamic block size means that the blockchain can increase in size rapidly if it needs to. That actually helps with helps prevent bottlenecks. But it also means that currently right now, transaction fees are something like $4 or so, which isn't that much when you can compare it to Bitcoin. But when you compare how many people are actually using Monero, it's a lot less than something like Bitcoin. So scaling, I think, for Monero, privacy will always be the most critical factor. But then I think in a relatively close second comes scalability. And so I think anything where they can alleviate their scaling issues, whether it's a MimbleWimble sidechain or something else, is definitely something that can help a lot. And so I think in 2018, you're going to see scalability become the big story for Monero.
Oh, definitely, yeah, definitely. The thing about Monero is it kind of has, if you want to talk about kind of the major difference between MimbleWimble and Monero, and I think a lot of people ask this.
Yeah, they do. Go ahead.
Yeah, Monero has a few different ways that it does it. It provides its confidentiality. So it has ring signatures, which is a way of hiding who actually signed the transaction out of a pool of many. And it uses stealth addresses, still an address, whereas MimbleWimble doesn't have them, but it uses kind of a stealthy form of them. And it also uses the exact same confidential transactions that are one of the pillars of MimbleWimble that I talked about earlier.
Right.
But it kind of does this. It provides a very good security, but there's also some redundancy there. And it kind of leads to the blockchain. I'm not going to call it bloat, but scaling.
I was going to call it bloat.
Yeah, but no, I don't want to disparage the project at all. But whereas MimbleWimble, there's I won't say that the privacy is perfect. It's certainly very good, but there are some things you could bring up and haven't brought up in arguments where Monero gets it or does a better job than MimbleWimble does on the privacy front. However, the scalability is kind of the solutions to scalability are built straight in, and this is down to the mathematics level. So this notion of cut through gives you all sorts of are
built into to GRIN or Monero?
No, built into MimbleWimble.
Oh, okay.
And so built into GRIN. So the kind of all sorts of options are opened up thanks to the mathematics of MimbleWimble to solve scaling. And that's actually something we can talk a little bit about as well, is kind of the whole scaling mechanisms that you have in MimbleWimble and GRIN.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, let's hear it, because that's kind of the story for part of 2017 and definitely for going into 2018 is, okay, how can you guarantee or at least try to solve the issues that come with a bunch of new users? Because the aim is to have as many users using it as possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to do that, you need good scalability. So just to give you an example, so this notion of cut-through that I talked about earlier, just to give you a real-world example of how that might work. Now, again, I can give you kind of a set of high-level figures. I can't stand by them, obviously, and won't until we actually see these in practice, but just kind of as a back-of-the-envelope exercise. So say the GRIN blockchain has been running for 2 years, has about 1 million blocks with 10 million transactions in it.
Okay.
And 100,000 UTXOs in its set. Before cut-through, this blockchain, the size of it would be around 130 gigs, which I'd say is fairly chunky for 2 years of operation.
Right.
And that's unfortunately, that's the price of confidentiality, is you need, all of the structures, and especially the range proofs involved in that, which, as we said, Monero uses as well, inflates that data. Because of this cut through, and there's a few different options of how you can actually address cut through when you actually do the cut through. You can do it before transactions go into a block, or you can do it all, later on down the line. An exchange can decide, for instance, to cut all of its transactions out once it's validated them. So after a cut through, you end up with a blockchain size of somewhere in the order of say 2 gigs for the chain, and then for the total data you need would be about 4 or 5 gigs.
Well, so you're talking about less than 10 gigs versus what, like 150 or something like that?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Massive reduction in the amount. And there's a few ways you can achieve this. Technically, in order to run a validating node, so I can download the whole blockchain, validate everything, and I can throw that entire thing away and just keep the UTXO set.
Okay, so when you first start off, you'll probably have to download the big chunky part, and then once that's validated...
Actually, there's going to be we have a few methods of syncing plans, so we'll have a simplified sync that'll just kind of get the relevant data and then go from there, basically. So that's actually another feature that we intend to implement in GRIN, is that you won't actually need to necessarily download the whole blockchain or the whole blockchain history in order to start being useful in the network.
Okay.
And again, that's something we get from cut through, and the fact that you can pretty much all you need once you trust the data set you have, all you need is the UTXO set. And that can be as small as, a couple of megs with the range proofs aside.
Yeah, so it sounds like this will definitely be a step forward. I know I'm not trying to force too much of a comparison with Monero, but it sounds like this is kind of, you can almost call it like a second generation privacy coin, at least with regards to scalability.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, a lot of the scalability is still theoretical, and we're working through it, dealing with the kind of technical issues that come up as they come up. But there's definitely going to be a scope for scalability here that I don't think has been seen before in any other coin.
Right. So I am kind of curious then, since Monero is essentially, from what I can from my own evaluation, it seems like it's the leading privacy coin at the moment. I am kind of curious, for starters, so do you guys have developers that are working on both projects?
No, some of the community members, kind of people who frequent our mailing list and our Gitter
okay, got it.
chats are kind of from the Monero community.
I guess you do have known. Yeah, let's say the known ones, because there are some people who are using pseudonyms, and so it's kind of hard to figure out who they are. So imagine that it's 2 years from now. Monero is still going strong. Let's say it's essentially the leading privacy coin, but GRIN is implemented, it's live, and people are starting to use it. So what do you think the use case kind of would be? When would you use Monero, or when would you use GRIN, or maybe is it too early to kind of decide that?
Yeah, it's a little early to decide. I think the best kind of description I've seen of this is to consider it possibly as a Bitcoin Litecoin situation, whereas Bitcoin / Monero would be the one that really holds a store of value, whereas MimbleWimble might be a bit more usable for everyday transactions because of the wallet-to-wallet interactions and the kind of nimbleness of the chain. So that might be a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And obviously, if Monero is considering using MimbleWimble as a sidechain, I suppose that's testament to how scalable and how quick it can work. I am kind of curious, because I think we didn't really go over it, but when it comes to the distribution curve, what's the block time that you guys are looking to target?
It's 1 minute block times.
Oh, wow.
So it's basically 1 GRIN per second for the rest of eternity.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And so when obviously you've worked on the mining algorithm, I know in the past people have said that, okay, well, if you have short block times, that it can cause issues with nodes getting kind of, I don't know if I'd say out of sync, but do you think that actually is a concern, or was that mostly theoretical?
No, definitely. I mean, it's more challenging to get consensus on a network where block times are so short. We've seen that a lot in testnet. That being said, there are coins out there that already have, similar block times, short block times. Right. So it is possible. It's just getting to the point where your code is kind of well enough established to ensure consensus is a bit more challenging in that regard.
Yeah, so I guess another question for me then is, for your specific fundraising, for your part, I think, how long does that go on for? And is it something where you're going to have to do a new fundraising goal once the money's up? Or what is the kind of schedule or timeline for your work? I assume you're working full-time on it, or at least the majority of the time.
I will be shortly, yeah.
Okay, so then what? Go ahead.
No, that's a good question. Well, this is something else that we took from Monero, which is their community funding model. So rather than just say, right, here's a fund, put money into it for development, we're going to be putting up kind of funding requests for particular tasks or particular reasons. One of the reasons would be, for instance, in my case, and this was the first experiment, hire a developer for 3 months to work on this full time.
Right.
And so rather than, put a big, long, open-ended thing, I'd much rather they stayed short and concise. And that does two things. One is it gives everybody good visibility onto where their money is going. And it does it in, over a short enough time frame that I can kind of reassure the community that they're getting some value for the money that's going in here. So if I just put up an open-ended fund to say, fund me for the next 2 years, and it's money's going into it indefinitely, there's a lot more. It's a lot more difficult for me to demonstrate that anyone's getting value for this money. So by doing short intervals, next 3 months, and here's what I'm going to work on for the next 3 months, and as the 3 months are going by, I'm going to keep a blog up to date about here's what I'm working on, here's what's happened, here's what this money has gone towards, and this is the model that we're going to use in future, because we're not doing any ICO or pre-mine or any kind of funny business like that. We need to very much rely on the community support and the community's trust in order to fund our development.
Yeah, and I think it probably puts quite a bit, well, maybe not quite a bit more pressure on you, but it does at least create some sort of accountability, because it's almost like it's a subscription where they don't have to renew the subscription of employing you if you're
they
not.
Don't need it. Yeah, this is the YeastPlume subscription basically. so I as a result, I feel like I have now not a debt, but I have a responsibility to the community to deliver on what I said I was going to do. And if I don't deliver on that, I don't expect anybody to continue this relationship, so to speak. And that's the kind of model I think we want going forward. And I absolutely have to say on that note that the response from the community has been absolutely incredible. I put up a request for funding for 3 months, and I was funded within 2 days.
Yeah, I saw. It looked like you were over the amount. Is that correct?
Went over the amount. It since Bitcoin has dropped, it's kind of come back in line with what the original amount was.
Right.
Yeah. So the amount has come down. Having your funding reserves in Bitcoin has some issues that I think we need to address, because while as you say, it's a great store of value, but it's probably not good to be relying on its value to be when you're actually trying to pay your salary out of it.
Yeah, I have a feeling you'll spend a little bit more time looking at the price of Bitcoin than you normally would, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If
the past few months, because I have my own kind of meager savings in Bitcoin. I don't really care about them, but once it becomes your salary, I was like, and if it's gone down and I've lost 10,000 out of that account, then that's a month or two gone from the work I can do.
Yeah, I was about to say we're
going to need to address that.
Yeah, it could definitely jeopardize your work. So I am kind of curious then. Obviously, I'm pretty bullish about this project based on what I've heard and what I've read, and I would like to see it succeed. And so let's say it does succeed, you launch, and it looks like things are going successfully. Is it something where would you like, at this point, if you kind of forecast forward a year and a half, would you like to continue working as close to full time on the project as possible? Is that something that you kind of see in the future or are hoping for?
Oh, I'm hoping for it at this point, to be honest. The thing about the blockchain technologies and especially this project is that understanding it and kind of working on it, it kind of hits all of my I don't know how to say it.
Values?
The things, values, but kind of stuff that really interests me. I've been a developer for 20 years, say, and I've worked on all sorts of things from, kind of bare metal stuff up to, these big sprawling Java projects that nobody's really interested in. But this kind of pushes all of my buttons in terms of where my interest lies. When I go to pick on the next thing I'm going to work on the project, I kind of scroll through, a list of open issues and what have you, and I try and pick the one that I have absolutely no idea what this issue is talking about. And then from going through that and talking to people and trying to figure out what it's about, the amount of learning that I can do, it's kind of unparalleled in any project I've worked on before. As well as the people involved are really people that I'm learning things from, and I feel that I need to bring my A game to everything in order to kind of progress properly in this project. So it's really great, and I really hope to be able to continue working on it for as long as possible.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting strategy. I am curious because you kind of hinted at it. So if you don't mind me asking, you don't have to answer, but what are the values typically that you're referring to? Are we talking philosophical values, or are we talking other sorts like hobby interests, or?
No, it's kind of a mixture of academic interest and technical interest in my case. I'm not a huge ideologue personally, but the technologies are just so interesting, and the people involved are so knowledgeable in what they do, and that I can continually learn from them. Even kind of the mathematics involved. Elliptic curve cryptography is something that kind of is not the most accessible thing, but being on a project like this kind of forces you, or not just forces you, but really piques your interest in it. And, I've learned mathematics that I never would have dreamed of getting into before this.
All right, well, I think we've done a pretty good job of giving a sort of overview of the GRIN project. It sounds like there's a lot to look forward to. So I guess for the listeners out there, Michael, what's the best way for them to either follow the project or maybe even contribute, whether financially or any way that someone can contribute? What are the ways that they can kind of follow the project?
Yeah, first of all, absolutely anyone can contribute. We're trying to push to get more than just developers to follow us and be interested in the project. If you need a starting point, the website is grin-tech.org. That kind of has it's a lovely website designed by developers. It looks like kind of a green and black monitor from the 80s.
Yeah, it looks like a terminal, a console.
It looks like a Hercules graphics adapter inspired.
I personally like it, but I know some people who are not developers maybe won't like it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's to be honest, it's temporary, but it does have links to kind of all of the various channels that we hang out and the code itself. The main places where the conversation is taking place right now would be on the mailing list and on gitter.im. In the GRIN lobby, GRIN/lobby channel. We are currently talking about opening up a bit more of an accessible forum, and we should have some information out about that soon.
Yeah, I'm curious real quick, are you guys, aside from, well, for starters, with developers, are there specific languages or skill sets that you guys are looking for? And aside from developers, what kind of skill sets would be helpful to the project?
Okay, well, on the development side, the project is implemented in Rust, and there some parts of it are in C, kind of in some of the ancillary libraries. Personally, I knew nothing about Rust before starting the project, so that shouldn't be a barrier to learning. It's all one big learning experience. And other kinds of people involved, we'd like users involved, people interested in privacy coins, people interested in advancing the field somehow, just to come in and to talk to us, try running the coin, give us their insights and feedback, give us their opinions, literally, as well as kind of on some of the other work that might need to be done. Obviously, our website might need a little bit of work if you're interested in that kind of thing. If you're more into the design, or I won't go as far as saying marketing, but promotional.
Right. And out of curiosity, so your guys' main way of interacting at this point with the project or with the currency is through a console, right? Command line?
That's right. Yeah, it's implemented as a Linux command line at the moment. However, some people are starting to kind of write some other wrappers around it to make it more accessible. There's some work going on to facilitate later work. say if we want to have our wallet in a browser that's just talking to the node locally. There's some work going on to do that.
All right, so there you go, listeners. If you want to find out more information about the project, the best place to go will probably be grin-tech.org. So I have to say thank you for coming on, Mike. It's been an absolute pleasure, and as we get closer to the actual launch, you can expect us to try to get you back on. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. I know you'll probably be incredibly busy at the time, but hopefully you won't forget about us.
No, I'll be happy to come back so long as you'll have me.
Cool. Thanks for coming on, Mike.
All right, thanks very much.
So, for all of you listeners out there, I hope you've enjoyed this interview. This is your captain wishing you fair winds and following seas, guys. Set sail.